Hello everyone, Forest Focus. Nottingham Forest have been busy in the transfer market already, so it might be easy to forget their first deal of the summer as they signed Marko Stamenic from Red Star Belgrade before sending the 22-year-old midfielder promptly to Olympiacos on loan. So will the New Zealand international be another transfer between the clubs that doesn't work out, or will he be the man to break the mould? Joining me to discuss all that and a little bit more is Sky Sport New Zealand commentator and sports radio host Jason Pine. Jason, good to have you with us. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Matt. Great to be invited along. Looking forward to catching you up a bit on Marko Stamenic.
Yes, he is a bit of an unknown quantity to us over here. And when he signed, I don't know if you know too much about the relationship between Forest and Olympiacos, but a lot of players have been traded between the clubs because we have the same owner. And it's not been the most fruitful relationship in terms of how those transfers have worked out. So there's a bit of skepticism straight away around Marco. Like, I think the sentiment was, he's never going to play for Forest. We won't see him in our shirt again. And I think people in your part of the world feel it might be slightly different. You think he might be the man who can make it in the Premier League for us?
Yeah, well, a bit of background on Marko Stamenic. I've kind of been aware of him for the last 6 or 7 years. First saw him play as a teenager in Wellington, where I live in New Zealand. And, you see a lot of young players, don't you? And you think, oh, that guy's got a little bit about him. He could be something, but you never really know. But Marko started making New Zealand age group sides, under 17s, under 20s, and then the full national side. And it was obvious that actually he was a player who had quite a high ceiling. As you probably know, he went offshore and played in Denmark for Copenhagen, then to Red Star Belgrade, and now obviously with Forest, but immediately out to Olympiacos. Um, I've seen a lot of footballers come out of New Zealand, Matt, and I've always said that I think Marko Stamenic has got a very, very high ceiling. I think he could play in the Premier League. We haven't had too many, as you know. Chris Wood, you know well, but other than him, Ryan Nelson, Winston Reid, and a couple of others who have had a handful of games here and there. But yeah, I truly believe that Marko Stamenic has what it takes. He's already played Champions League, of course, for both of his previous clubs. He's played against Manchester City 3 times and played 90 minutes in each of them. So that gives you an indication as to what his previous coaches thought. I think he's got the ability. I guess he just needs the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about him as a player in terms of strengths and maybe areas that he just needs to work on, because he is still 22. He's still kind of at the early stages of his career. We have to bear that in mind as well.
Yep, young player, 22, as you say, midfielder. I'm not exactly sure what his best midfield position is. I guess it depends largely on formation. I've always liked him as, if you think of a 6, as sitting in front of the back 4, a defensive midfielder. I've always liked Marco slightly further advanced, and let's call it an 8, not necessarily a number 10 and behind the strikers, but an 8, a box to box midfielder, very fit, tall, lithe, moves across the grass really well, comfortable in possession, very comfortable in possession, actually, around 360 degrees, and just a composed footballer. If there's one thing he does have to add to his CV, it's goal scoring. For a player of his ability and the skills that he possesses, he has really struggled for both club and country to score goals. I'm not exactly sure why that is, whether it's a confidence thing or just that it's something that he needs to work a bit harder on. But if there was one thing that I would say I'd love to see more from Marko Stamenic, it's an output as far as goal scoring is concerned. Other than that, he's a very accomplished midfield player who really you could see slotting into a number of formations, depending on what the situation required.
Do you know much about him as a person? Because he's been in Europe for quite a few years. So I think that says a bit about him as a guy, I guess, moving around the world. I don't know if he brought his family with him or anything like that, but I don't know if you know, like you say, you've watched him for a long time. Do you know what he's like as a guy or not?
Yeah, I've met Marco several times in a media sense. Have got to know his family a little bit just from being in and around. Comes from a football mad family. Dad Nico and Mum Kalala have followed him around a lot to watch him play. He hasn't brought either of his parents with him, but I believe he has a partner. I'm again not sure of the situation with regards to whether she'll be with him in Greece and then in the UK, but a lovely guy, Matt. Mature beyond his years, as you often find with young players who leave home early to chase their sporting dreams. I think he was 18, even 17, 18, certainly a teenager when he left New Zealand, and I think you grow up pretty quickly when you leave home at that age. Jeepers, when I was 18, I wasn't even sure that I could cross the road confidently, but here he is, making a career for himself. Very friendly. When you get the chance to meet him, I think you'll like him immediately. Kiwis tend to be, fairly down to earth, fairly laid back. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we do have a hard a work ethic, I guess you'd say, and I think just an ability to get on with all kinds of people. So yeah, as a human being, terrific young man.
Where's he ranking the New Zealand national team currently? Then is he your second best player? I guess Chris Wood's your best player. You might correct me, but is Marco number two in the rankings? Would you say or not?
Don't know whether he'd be quite number two. We've got Libby Kakachi, who plays in Serie A with Empoli. I think he
Mm.
would be, by most measures, our second best. Yeah, Woodsy's our best player, has been for a long time, and you've obviously had the chance to watch him play for Forest, and we've just been delighted with what Chris Wood has managed to achieve, both for his club and his country. He's our leading international goal scorer as well, and only needs another 14 appearances to be our all-time leading appearance maker as well. Marco has a ceiling, which, as I said before, is very high. I mean, it took Chris Wood a long time to establish himself in the UK. He bounced around a lot of championship clubs before he got to the Premier League with Burnley, then Newcastle, and on to Nottingham Forest. For Marko Stamenic to have got a deal like this, yes, albeit out on loan to Olympiacos, but to have secured a deal with a Premier League club at the age of 22 is I think an indication of the trajectory that he can achieve. So yeah, I think Marco's certainly in our top 3 or 4 players at the moment. Once he starts playing regularly, fingers crossed, in the Premier League, then I think he'll certainly jump up those rankings.
Do you think he's a bit of kind of untapped potential then, Marco, in a bit of a hidden gem? 'Cause I know Coventry almost got in there first, but Forest have nipped in quite early in Premier League terms. Do you think he's still got quite a way to go in terms of his ceiling there? But we're buying a lot of potential. You think?
Absolutely. And I think if he can be polished, if that potential can be polished, the raw materials are absolutely there, without any question. And look, I don't envy the job of any Premier League recruitment department or any football club's recruitment department. They must get sent hundreds, if not thousands, of show reels, if they're still called that, of highlights packages, and those are always the best bits, aren't they?
Mm.
So you are always, I think, taking a bit of a punt, but they've clearly done a bit of background. He's had enough football in Europe and in Denmark and in Serbia to have, I guess, been looked at, considerably by whoever has scouted him, and they've obviously seen exactly what you said, Matt: potential, and the ability to, within the Forest system, grow as a player into someone who could be, who could be really, really useful for you. So, yeah, I think that's exactly it. You're not buying a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, but I think what you are buying is someone who could well be a very, very good player for you.
Just last year, Marco, it does seem like he's. I mean, I haven't seen much on Raw, but he's climbing the ladder quickly and knocking down each barrier in front of him. Because a New Zealand league to the Danish league to the Champions League through Red Star, like you say, now the Greek league, and they'll be playing in the Europa League. So he's going up the ladder. The Premier League's such a big step. I think the golf is pretty huge. I guess that's the challenge for him, is it? And you feel like he can handle it because he's handled everything else so far.
Yeah, well, I think so, and I think we all hope so. The proof will be in the pudding, obviously, but look, again, you never really know, do you? There are players you see and you think, well, that guy's, he's a 100 game Premier League player for sure, and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. Marco Touchwood has stayed relatively injury free throughout the early part of his career. If he comes, under the guidance of good coaches, good managers, he's got good people around them, as I say, from a very solid family. I think he's got all the tools, as I said before, all the raw materials, and as you say, he has scaled every height that's been in front of him. And you're right, the Premier League is a different kettle of fish altogether. We all know that. He knows that. But look, I feel as though he is he is within touching distance of that now. And if he continues to improve in the way that he has over the last 5 or 6 years, then I don't see any reason why he can't be a very good Premier League player for you.
I also wanted to pick your brains a little bit about Chris Wood and football in New Zealand in general. I mean, is Chris Wood kind of the best New Zealand footballer of all time? How's he viewed back home?
Well, I think as far as the stats are concerned, you don't score, what is it, 69 Premier League goals without being some sort of player. Is he our best player? It's funny, Matt. There's a bit of debate around about that. I think a player from a previous generation who was Oceania Player of the Century, Winton Rufer, is often regarded as our greatest ever player. He played in a time when he played in Switzerland and then in Germany for Werder Bremen. Um, eh, we couldn't see that back here. There was, these days we can tune into any league we want anywhere in the world simply with a click of a mouse. But back then, a lot of what Winton Rufer did in club football was unseen. Grainy highlights occasionally, and you could never really tell. But those who played with and against him always talk about Winton Rufer as being a generational talent. And then there was Ryan Nelson, who you'll probably know from his time at Blackburn and Tottenham. He I've heard it said is our greatest all white. Our national team's called the All Whites. They play for the most part in white. That's their nickname, the All Whites. I think he captained New Zealand to the World Cup in 2010. Lion-hearted, committed leader. Just a hard on the sleeve, full throttle, 100%er. I guess you would say, and I think that's what New Zealand has really, over the years, certainly domestically, been very good at producing good, solid, no nonsense defenders. Then Chris Wood comes along. He's a striker, obviously, and as I said before, he went the long way around to the Premier League, but he got there and showed that he can score goals. Look, he's never going to be the silkiest striker. He's never going to be a guy who picks up the ball inside his own half and beats 4 or 5 players and scores a goal. But they all count for one, don't they? And 5 or 6 times he scored double-figure Premier League goals, and that puts him in rarefied air as far as output is concerned. So yeah, I think Chris Wood has achieved more than any of our previous footballers in terms of doing it week in, week out, season in, season out in the very best league in the world. So by that measure, yes, he is our best. He's our highest achiever. But then you look at Winton Rufer and you look at Ryan Nelson and you think those guys were special too. So yeah, that's I think a very long-winded way of saying that he's certainly in the conversation.
What about Chris as a guy? Because he's often put up for media duties when Forest have either had a good result or, more importantly, a bad result, which kind of shows a thing about the player's temperament. Obviously, he's quite experienced now, but what about him as a person from your experience? Because I guess he carries the goal-scoring weight of expectation for the national team as well. So what do you make of him as a bloke?
Yeah, certainly does do that. And one thing I'll say about Chris Wood as well is that he never turns down the opportunity to play for his country. And I mean, we're not talking about just going somewhere else in Europe to play. Often it's we're 12,000 miles away, and it's a long way to come to play a game of football against what is often a footballing minnow. But Chris Wood never ever says no. You hear there's a lot of players, and I'm sure this happens in all countries when they've got a meaningless friendly in an international window. They'll mysteriously tweak their hamstring and say, "Well, I know I might just sit this one out. I just got to sort my hamstring out." Chris Wood has never had a mystery hamstring that's kept him out of anything. In fact, the only thing that kept him out of the most recent window was his wedding. So I think that was probably quite a good excuse to not coming because he was getting married. But as a guy, level-headed, doesn't ride the highs too high or the lows too low, doesn't get too excited, as you know. Temperament, you mentioned that word. I think that is something that's always been apparent. And he was another one, Matt. He first played for New Zealand at the age of 17. He went to that World Cup I mentioned before as an 18-year-old, came off the bench in all 3 matches New Zealand played, and very nearly scored against Italy. It was just the width of the post denying him a World Cup goal at the age of 18. So he's been around for a while and has lived away from home pretty much all of his adult life, has had to, really go through some peaks and troughs and some thick and thin in his football career, but is still going and is still producing the goods. So yeah, a very well-rounded, solid human being, and someone I've enjoyed the chance to deal with in a media sense as well.
Excellent. Just before we talk about football in New Zealand, a quick word for our sponsors, the Trent Lab. I don't think you'll make this one, Jason. It's probably a bit too far for you. But there's the Trent Lab Fest on Saturday, July the 13th at 2 p.m. Get your tickets from gigantic.com, just search NAV Fest, and you can see a list of the acts that are playing. If you watch on YouTube, if you're listening, they include the magnificent names of Stan Buckroyd, High Speed, Peach, the Flow Acoustic, and Steve McGill, who plays before Forest games in the NAV on the stage. So get your tickets for that one. Right. New Zealand football, just listening to you there, Jason, when you were talking about Chris Wood and the other chap you mentioned, forgive me his name, who went and played in
Libby Kakachi, yes.
Exactly, yeah. How did players make it in Europe in years gone by? Did they have to pack their bags and go and beg for trials? And has that evolved now to where scouts are watching, I guess, is the New Zealand teams play in the A-League primarily and they get picked up that way? How's New Zealand football evolved over the years?
Yeah, certainly in the early days, in the old days, as we say, I talked about Winton Rufer, you had to go offshore. No professional competition in New Zealand, a domestic league, which was really very much second fiddle. As you know, New Zealand's a country steeped in rugby union history. And, for a long time, football wasn't even available to play at school. You played rugby or you went and sat in the library. That was pretty much it. So, for a long time, it wasn't even an option. But yeah, from sort of the 80s onwards, players started to emerge who they went overseas, whether it was to Europe or to the United States. That was a well-traveled route as well into the college system in the United States. That's the way that Ryan Nelson found his way to the Premier League through DC United in Washington. But yeah, in the last couple of decades, and also with the advent of the internet, obviously, Matt, these players are able to be seen. As I said before, you can tune into pretty much any league in the world. If you're a scout and a name comes across your desk, you can just Google that guy or girl, and their highlights will pop up for you to have a look at. So these days, yeah, there are two professional teams in New Zealand that play. It's a bit of a strange situation. There's the Wellington Phoenix, who have been around for a while. Auckland FC will join the A-League next season, and it's part of the Australian National League. So there are 11 Australian clubs up until this season. The one New Zealand club, soon to be two, and what we're really seeing, as I mentioned Libby Kakachi before, there have been a number of others. Ben Wayne is a player who played for the Phoenix and is now at Plymouth Argyle, about to be managed by Wayne Rooney of all people. So he's a striker, Ben Wayne. So he'll no doubt pick up a few tips. I'm not sure how long Wayne Rooney will last there, but while he's there, I'm sure Ben Wayne will pick his brains. And others as well have graduated through playing in the A-League, have had eyes on them, and have been picked up. And the A-League knows what it is. It knows that it's not the be-all and end-all certainly for young footballers. For some, look, it's their ceiling. It gives them an ability to play, 6 or 7, 8, a decade-long years of professional football in their own country, be it Australia or New Zealand, and that's something that hasn't always been available. But as a stepping stone, it's not a bad league, and good players have come through. Marko Stamenic never played in the A-League. He sort of skipped that bit out, but a number of others have gone on to big careers. And I think there's some Australian players who have turned up in the Premier League. Matt Ryan, a goalkeeper who, was at Brighton for a long time. Aaron Moore, you might know, I think Huddersfield, he was there. There are a lot of Australian players and increasingly more New Zealand players now who are being spotted and scouted and picked up. So long may that continue.
So where does football rank in New Zealand now in terms of as a participation sport for kids in schools and adults who might play on a weekend, and also kind of as a viewing sport in terms of attendances against, like, rugby so massive there, obviously, and I guess cricket as well. Where's football rank?
It's the biggest participation sport now among children, under 12s. More under 12 boys and girls play football than any other sport in New Zealand, which is quite something really when you think about our rugby heritage. A lot of them tend to, once they get to secondary school, their college years, their teenage years, they either maybe fall out of the sport or they move more into rugby. But football has certainly got a foothold in the participation space, and I think also in the social space as well. I myself still play a bit of we call it masters football, veterans football. Old guys with not a heck of a lot of skill who get together on a Saturday afternoon, play a game of football, and then enjoy a few stories afterwards with a cold beverage or two. That's something that that certainly exists up and down New Zealand. And as far as the cut through in terms of attendances, viewership figures, that sort of thing. Here's an example. We've got England here to play the All Blacks this coming weekend. 2 test matches, one in Dunedin, one in Auckland, and every news bulletin this week and leading up to the weekend will be about the rugby. It just monsters everything else, particularly when it comes to the All Blacks. But little gains are being made. People are aware of our professional clubs. They're aware of our players. People, I think if you walk down the street in the 1980s and ask people if they knew who Winton Rufer was, many of them would not. But there wouldn't be too many New Zealanders who don't know who Chris Wood is. He is now in that rarefied air of a sports person who transcends all parts of New Zealand life. Hopefully Marko Stamenic is on the same path. So yeah, rugby's still very much number one here, Matt. But football is starting to, I wouldn't say punch above its weight, but certainly make a bit of a splash and be relevant to large parts of New Zealand society.
I'm going off on a tangent here, as we often do, away from Forest a bit, but I find this stuff really interesting. I mean, is it interwoven into the whole culture of the country then? Is that why it's so big? Because rugby over here is, I mean, I suppose it's similar to New Zealand. You've got football, I can find the camera way up here, and then there's a big drop off probably to cricket, I guess, and then rugby is pretty parallel. How come rugby is so massive in New Zealand?
It's the heritage. It is. That word's a great word. It's interwoven into our history. The history of the All Blacks, the famous black jersey. And I think also what it does is it gives us relevance in the world. We're a pretty small country, 5 million people down the bottom of the world. I've seen, world maps that have missed New Zealand off altogether. We've just been extinguished from existence. But I said before about Chris Wood. I think when New Zealanders travel, whether it be through Asia or up into the United States or into Europe, and if they're talking to people from any nation and they mention that they're from New Zealand, 9 times out of 10, the first thing the person says back is, "Oh, All Blacks." That is what almost defines us. It is the most famous export out of our country is the mighty All Blacks, who over the years have achieved an 80% win record against all comers. So I think that's it's something for us to be proud of, something for us to, as I say, to give us global relevance. And they often say that that the coach of the All Blacks is the biggest job in New Zealand, almost bigger than the Prime Minister's job. And I actually think that is the case. They certainly get about as many column inches. So we've got a new All Blacks coach who will oversee his first test match on the weekend. And as I say, I bet you he's feeling as much pressure as our Prime Minister is as he goes about his daily business of running the country. So yeah, deeply woven into our heritage and something we're very, very proud of.
And just lastly, then, on the cut through in football, is that largely down to the internet then? Because New Zealand, it's such I'd love to go there. It looks like the most beautiful country, but it's so far on the other side of the world that you're so far away from the big European leagues. Has it been the internet that's kids are seeing social media clips of players all the time now that they wouldn't see? Because you were saying before we started recording, you're a football man above rugby, and you're a big outlier now. You're a little bit older than me, but now a kid's just seeing all the clips of the Euros, and that's prompting the cut through more and more, you think?
Absolutely. Access is what has led to this. And it's not just football. The American sports. My son's a massive fan of American sport, but he watches it almost exclusively on his phone. He's not watching ESPN or one of the American channels on our normal TV. He's just looking at clips posted by the clubs he follows, or the NBA, or the NFL, or whatever it might be, and that's at his fingertips. There are, as I said before, a couple of taps on your phone or clicks of your mouse, and you can be watching any football league anywhere in the world. The Euros over here at the moment, and we're watching it at breakfast time, obviously with the time difference. But yeah, or slightly earlier in the morning. I haven't got a lot of sleep, I can tell you, in the last 3 weeks, getting up to watch these group games at 1 a.m., 4 a.m., and 7 a.m. over here, Matt. But you don't miss it because it's such top quality stuff. But available to watch on your normal TV, to watch on your device, to watch the highlights later on your tablet or your phone or whatever it might be. Just now, the accessibility of football for kids and for slightly bigger kids is so far ahead of what it was that it can't help but help with the cut through of a sport like football in a country like New Zealand.
Let's finish talking about, just quickly, let's finish on a Stamenic question, because that's what we're primarily here for. In terms of timescales and things like that, the way his career's gone, do you think maybe he spends one season in Olympiacos and then hopefully we see him in Nottingham, or might it take a bit longer? Obviously, there's caveats around manager changes, injuries. A lot of players' careers, I think, are just down to circumstance and luck to a small extent. But what's the time scale would you hope for Stamenic in terms of playing in the Premier League?
It's a 5-year deal, as I understand it. So clearly they see a long-term plan there. But I would hope that he does at Olympiacos what he's done at FC Copenhagen and at Red Star Belgrade during his real. I mean, he had a season in Copenhagen where he was out on loan to another Danish club, but his first full season there was the one when he played in the Champions League. Then went to Red Star. He's only had the one season there, and that's seen him picked up by Forest. So here's what I hope is that he plays really well for Olympiacos. That whoever's watching him from Nottingham Forest can see both his potential and his development. And when the Premier League season of 2025-26 rolls around, that he's involved in pre-season at Forest, shows what he can do, and then starts to climb the ladder there. I can't see him. Well, here's what I hope. I hope that he's not at Olympiacos for 2 or 3 years of his 5-year deal. I'm not sure that would be what is needed for Marko Stamenic right now. I think the sooner he is in a Premier League environment and can start to become a sponge in that environment, be surrounded by good resource, good coaching, top quality players, the better it'll be for him. That's a very selfish view, I know, from a New Zealander wanting the best for another New Zealander, but I also want him to succeed and have whatever club he plays for succeed. And if that's Nottingham Forest in the Premier League for next season and onwards, then fantastic. I mean, jeepers, we haven't had too many Kiwis to have in the Premier League to have two in one club. There'd be a lot of Nottingham Forest fans down this end of the world, Matt. I can tell you if there were not one but two Kiwis playing week in, week out for Nottingham Forest.
Brilliant. Right, we shall leave it there. As ever, if you have enjoyed this, do us a favour and hit like on the video. It helps the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe. You can become a channel member and give us a lovely review on iTunes and Spotify. Where can people find you, Jason, if they want to check out a bit more about New Zealand football and follow how the national team are getting on?
Yeah, just on my socials, Piney NZ, Piney NZ. Pretty simple to find. It's mainly football content. You won't find too much else there. So if that's what you're after, then yeah, just follow me on my socials.
Excellent. We might be back tomorrow. All depends with Forest what they announce around transfers. As we record this, Carlos Miguel has hopefully been announced a new keeper, but if not, we shall be back potentially over the weekend, but definitely on Monday. So thanks very much to everyone who watched along. Jason, been wonderful to have you with us. Hope you enjoyed that.
Loved it, Matt. Thanks so much for asking me along. Really enjoyed the chat.
No, it's been a great pleasure. Have a good day, everyone. If we don't see you tomorrow, hopefully we shall see you soon.